Hello, and welcome to my new channel for a resurrection of my old favorite, Sequelology, a series that delves into the forgotten sequels and remakes and spin-offs of some classic Hollywood films. I'm Brian, and I was inspired to bring back this series while watching today's original subject, the 1976 religious thriller, The Omen. And I was thinking, I wonder if people know where this series goes in the sequels. And I was already milling about some different options, so now I think it's my duty to let you know. But to know where it goes, you have to know where it's been. So please allow me this quick run-through of The Omen. We open in Rome with Robert Thorne, played by Gregory Peck, who's finding out that his wife Kathy, played by Lee Remick, has lost her baby during delivery. A priest convinces Robert to secretly adopt a baby and not tell his wife. In fact, he has a baby ready. Robert takes him up on this, they move to London, and it's a few years of bucolic, happy times. At Damien's 5th birthday, though, his nanny jumps off the roof and hangs herself, saying,
"Look at me, Damien, it's all for you!"
Another priest shows up at Robert's office and demands Robert commit to Christianity to protect himself from the son of the devil. He says he was at the hospital when Damien was born, and implies that he knows Kathy is not Damien's mother. A new nanny shows up unannounced, and both think the other hired her. Robert also discovers the new nanny has brought a big, growling Rottweiler into the house, and tells her to get rid of it. The next day, Kathy and Damien go to a safari park, and all the animals flee from Damien and attack their car. Robert has a clandestine meeting with the priest, who tells him to visit a man in Israel, and also says that Kathy is pregnant and Damien will try to kill it. After Robert storms off, a crazy windstorm kicks up, and a large pole falls off the church and impales the priest. Kathy asks to see a psychiatrist and tells Robert she is, in fact, pregnant, and wants to get an abortion. The psychiatrist tells Robert that Kathy thinks 1, Damien is not hers, and 2, that he is evil. Sharp cookie, that Kathy. Later, Kathy's messing with a plant on this insanely narrow walkway of her home, and the evil nanny sends Damien out on a big wheel to knock her plummeting to ground level. And whoops, she's lost her baby. Meanwhile, a photographer named Keith, who's been taking pictures around town throughout the film, tells Robert that a bunch of people he's taken pictures of have recently been killed, and have artifacting in his pictures that coincide with the way they died. He took a selfie, and it's got it too. He also cites a bunch of ominous shit that took place 5 years ago on Damien's birthday, on 6/6 at 6 a.m., which was the reason for that funny caption at the beginning, and mentions a 666 birthmark. He and Keith go to Rome to check up, and surprise, the hospital burned down and all the paperwork is gone. They're directed by the original priest, who is alive but badly burned, to an abandoned cemetery where they find the grave of Damien's actual mother, who turns out to be a jackal, as well as Robert's actual baby, who has a head wound that makes Robert realize this was all a setup. They're interrupted by more growling Rottweilers who attack them, and they barely escape. He calls a still very injured Kathy to get out of London, but the creepy nanny shows up, and it's curtains for Kathy. Robert says Damien's gots to go, and he and Keith meet the guy in Israel, who turns out to be an exorcist who gives him some holy daggers and the game plan for murdering his son. He's got to kill him with the dagger on holy ground, like a church. Robert gets overwhelmed by this task and chucks the daggers, and when Keith goes to retrieve them, has his fate sealed. Back at home, Robert finds the 666 on Damien's scalp that confirms his demonage and gets attacked by the evil nanny. Robert manages to kill her and escapes with Damien. He speeds for the church, attracting the attention of some cops who shoot Robert as he's trying to stab Damien. The film ends at Robert's funeral, as Damien smiles to the camera. This film is often lumped in with the wave of religious thrillers that came in the wake of the massive success of The Exorcist in 1973. But The Omen has more in common with the domestic paranoia of 1968's Rosemary's Baby, which also deals with the idea of your infant being a demonic entity, and also sports an ornate European atmosphere. The Omen's plot feels like it could very easily run off the rails. But director Richard Donner, mostly famous for crowd-pleasing action blockbusters like Superman or Lethal Weapon, manages to evoke a visceral, grandiose, operatic awe, more closely associated with Italian giallo mystery thrillers. This is assisted by the wild faux Latin choral score by Jerry Goldsmith that is perhaps the film's most lasting legacy. This film was an enormous hit, giving Fox their biggest opening weekend ever up to that point, nearly doubling its budget on its first weekend. So of course, it inspired a sequel, 2 years hence, called Damien, Omen 2. We open Damien with the exorcist from the first film, played by Leo McKern as the single and only actor to appear in more than one Omen film, wildly. Furiously trying to convince a friend of his to kill Damien. He convinces him by showing him some cave paintings with Damien's exact face, just in time for the entire tunnel to collapse, killing them both. Fast forward 7 years. Damien is 12 and living in Chicago with his uncle Richard, played by William Holden, who turned down the first film for being too silly looking, and then it made a boatload of money, so here he is. And Richard's wife Anne, played by Lee Grant, our second straight Omen film with a lead actress named Lee. Damien lives with them and Richard's son Mark from a previous marriage, and they go to a military academy together. Richard's great-aunt Marion hates Damien and wants him away from the family, where she's writing Richard out of the will. But while Richard and Anne's friend Dr. Warren shows them slides coincidentally related to exactly the plot, a raven flies into Marion's room, and down she goes. A journalist named Joan, a friend of Dr. Warren's, tells Richard he's in grave danger. Richard is not interested. She sees Damien at school football practice and flees. Her car dies, and she gets attacked by a raven, wandering out to get creamed by a truck. Speaking of the military academy, the boys get a new commander named Neff, played by the great Lance Henriksen. Some kid starts bullying Mark, and Damien uses mind powers to abuse him. Mark is like, "What the hell was that?" And Damien says he doesn't know. Damien acts out in class, and a teacher tries to embarrass him, but he has an absolutely encyclopedic knowledge of basically the entirety of history. Neff pulls him out and gives him ominous encouragement about a day when everyone will know him, and recommends he read some specific Bible passages. Damien does, and hears the shit about the number of the beast, and freaks out when he finds that he has it. He sprints away and yells, "Why me?" to the sea. The other major part of this film's plot deals with a lot of tedious machinations about business proposals and financial shares, relating to Thorne's business, which is vaguely business. There's a lot of dry discussion about expanding operations into agriculture and the potential ethics of land obtainment. A senior manager shelves a project run by this guy Paul, and then that senior manager falls through the ice during a hockey game and drowns, which the film implies is the Raven's doing. Paul is now the CEO of the company and did some land purchases without Richard's consent. A Thorne employee reports a suspicious rash of deaths around some of the land purchases to Paul, just as Damien's class is visiting the factory, where a mysterious explosion kills the employee and poisons the entire class, except, of course, Damien. His doctor wants to keep Damien for tests, discovers something mysterious about his cellular structure, and is immediately gruesomely killed in some sort of opaque elevator accident. Dr. Warren finds the exorcist's daggers and rushes to Richard's house, screaming that he's in great danger. Mark overhears, puts 2 and 2 together, and flees into the woods. Damien follows, and Mark tells him he knows Damien is the devil. Damien reveals that he's aware and insists Mark join him. When Mark declines, Damien force chokes him to death and screams in anguish. Richard goes to see a crazed Dr. Warren in New York. Warren takes Richard to the tunnel wall with Damien's face, being shipped in a train car. As he does, the train activates by itself and kills Warren, which finally convinces Richard. He tells Anne he's going to kill Damien. Anne argues against it, and it turns out that's because Anne is on Damien's side. As she stabs Richard with the daggers, and Damien lights him on fire with his mind. Damien walks out of the building as the police arrive, and the credits roll. Director Richard Donner was busy filming Superman, so they hired Mike Hodges, the hard-boiled British director of Get Carter. But apparently he worked too slowly and too expensively, so they replaced him with flat, efficient workman Don Taylor. And as such, Omen 2 has none of the original film's operatic tone, which was, of course, its main draw. Instead, this just turns into a glum procession of people saying, "Hey, this seems bad," and immediately dying. A slasher film without a killer. A conspiracy thriller without a conspiracy. The film spends a ton of time on characters they imply to be of the satanic disposition, especially Paul and Neff, and then never pay any of it off. Paul's entire arc is that he wants to do some land acquisition, the guy ahead of him stopping him dies, and then he does some land acquisition, and never appears again. Neff gets that one scene where he tells Damien he knows who he is, and then literally does not have another line in the film. There's a potentially interesting point here about Damien not really participating as he realizes his powers, but the film doesn't really lean into that either. And after a certain point, he just kind of goes from, "I don't know what's happening," to "Why is this happening to me?" to "Yeah, that's me." And we get no further insight. I think Anne's twist makes sense, if only because she appears so sparingly that the film otherwise has absolutely no reason for that character to exist. The movie generally just fades from view because it has nothing to say and no real style to evoke. Also, there's an extremely funny shot where they're supposedly in New York, but you can see the Sears Tower in the shot. 3 years later, a third film was produced. There doesn't seem to be any real good artistic reason for its existence, but in 1981, out popped Omen 3, The Final Conflict, from first-time director Graham Baker. We do another very anime time jump here, 21 years in the future, which is pretty wild considering the first film is decisively set in 1976. And the second film was 7 years from there, which, if we tease that out chronologically, this film would take place in 2004. Anyway, Damien is now 33 years old, played by Sam Neill, and the CEO of his adopted family's vague, ill-defined business company. Damien tells his associate Harvey he anticipates being named ambassador to Great Britain. "What about the current ambassador to Great Britain?" Harvey asks. "Well, looks like the job's open." Damien talks the President of the United States into appointing him ambassador. At a British party, he meets a journalist named Kate. They become romantically involved, and he becomes a father figure for her son. Damien scowls at a man in the park yelling about the second coming of Jesus. This man turns out to be part of a group from the original Italian church, who has recovered the holy daggers and is planning to take Damien down. One of them tries to kill him during a television interview, but is, unsuccessful. Damien pockets the dagger and tells his associate that it's the only thing that can kill him. The assassination team says they're sure the second coming is actually happening, and seems to be coinciding with a rare celestial event, but now Damien is tipped off. The hit squad tries to draw Damien into a trap, but gets tricked by devil magic and kills their own partner, then get fatally trapped in a sewer. On a fox hunt with Kate's son, Damien gets the best of 2 more hit squad members, thanks to animal mind control, scaring a horse into throwing one man off a bridge, and convincing a bunch of hounds to kill another. Damien amasses a bunch of followers, warriors style, and tells them to kill every British boy born on March 24th, 1981, from midnight to 6 a.m., specifying that date, which makes the timeline for the other films absolutely impossible. From here, we get an incredible montage of infants being murdered. Kate does a report about it, which draws attention from the priest among the death squad, who gives her the scoop. All the babies killed were born within the same 6-hour period on the orders of the Antichrist, who he identifies as Damien Thorne. She laughs, but he tells her to check for the 666 mark. After having violent, painful sex, Kate finds Damien passed out and scoops the mark on his head. Kate's son, who now loves Damien like a father, reports this meeting with the priest to Damien and follows the priest to Harvey's house. It turns out the priest was at Harvey's house because Harvey's son was born in that range. Damien tells Harvey to kill his son, and Harvey resists, running home to tell his wife, who gets possessed by Damien and kills both the baby and Harvey with a hot iron. Meanwhile, Kate finds that her son is now hanging out permanently with Damien, at least until he uses the kid like a human shield against the priest's attack. He screams out the second coming to show himself, but Kate runs up and stabs him with the dagger. He stumbles to a window and collapses as a spectral being appears. We hear triumphant music and see Bible verses, and the movie immediately ends. Well, this one feels a little more atmospheric and melodramatic than 2, but it similarly never really gets any momentum going. Once we establish the intentions of the opposition, it's once again just sort of a rote procession of people we barely know dying one by one. Roger Ebert had a funny line that the disappointment grows, quote, as we realize that the apocalyptic confrontation between the forces of good and evil is being reduced to a bunch of guys with Italian accents running around trying to stab Damien. There's no growing sense of dread or anticipation. Damien's reach and his powers are both ill-defined and inconsistent, and it makes it hard to get a handle on what the stakes are in any given scene. And then it just ends so abruptly. Sam Neill is stately as always, but he just doesn't have a lot to do, and the film is just too glum and weirdly small scale for its intentions. There was intended to be a 4th film in the original Omen lineage, based on a 1983 novel called Omen 4 Armageddon 2000, revealing that Damon got Kate pregnant, and bam, new son of Satan. But scheduling conflicts and bad financials kept it from getting made, and the Omen series went dormant. A decade later, in 1991, the Fox network was looking to make a bunch of TV sequels to famous media, and one that I'm guessing just sorta seemed easy was The Omen. So out they come with Omen 4, The Awakening. Considering how fudged the timeline was for the first 3 Omen films, they probably could have gotten away with just doing another Damien. But instead of any long time jumps, what Omen 4 decides to do is just eschew any narrative setup in any scene, doing nothing to make it clear what is happening at any time, for any reason, to any character. This motherfucker lurches and barrels forward, like an episode of Gem and the Holograms, or that Futurama episode where time keeps on slipping. We barely meet attorneys Jean and Karen York, who are adopting a baby girl from an orphanage, which seems to be stressful to this unidentified nun. We cut abruptly to the Yorks gathering their friends to show off the new baby, named Delia, who immediately scratches Karen across the face. We cut again to the nun, Sister Yvonne, who is upset that a spontaneous eclipse is happening, and tells the Mother Superior, "You've damned us, cursed us with that child," which seems to bear out when the head nun immediately dies. Cut! Karen has an infection in her throat and gets a prescription from their doctor friend. Cut! Delia gets baptized and f***ing hates it. Sister Yvonne hates it too. Cut! There goes the priest that did the baptism. Cut! We get a happy family montage. Cut! Without any setup, we abruptly see a man on a precarious ledge taking pictures of what he says in voiceover is a congressman having an affair. The man then falls into a dumpster. Cut! Major Briggs from Twin Peaks tells Gene he should run for Congress to replace this congressman. Cut! We're at a child's birthday party, and a woman who I thought was Karen but might be Sister Yvonne is glared at by a child we've never seen before out a window. There's just so much quick cross-cutting to scenes we have absolutely no context for. It's dizzying. Like, the time between the priest dying and this scene is legitimately less than 3 minutes of screen time. This child is, of course, Delia, who is now 8 in one of the Omen series' prototypical time jumps. Cut! Here's Karen and Delia playing peekaboo in the rain on what appears to be a busy on-ramp, and Delia runs out in front of a speeding truck and is only saved by a randomly passing Rottweiler. Cut! Guess what? The Yorks have a new pet. Cut! Gene York has won the congressional seat, but also his posters say re-elect? Was he already a congressman? I went back and checked, and this is never established. Anyway, cut! Delia's at school, and some bully is stepping on her sandwich! She hits him with her lunchbox, and he slaps her. Cut! His parents are yelling at Gene and Karen and storming off. Delia promises to stay away from him, and the tone of this scene implies she did something demonic, a la Damien force-choking his school chum, but she didn't. That was completely reasonable. Anyway, cut! Back at school, she immediately steals something from him and makes him climb an insanely tall, rickety ladder, which scares him, and he pees his pants. Cut! His dad glares at Delia, and wham! He's dead. Cut! She's in a horse riding class. Surprise, all the horses hate her, and she gets thrown off. Cut! We're at the hospital, and their doctor friend says it might be because she had her first period. What? Cut! They've hired a nanny who loves New Age crystals, which Delia hates. Cut! The nanny we met 2 seconds ago is now talking with a long-haired guy in a Jeep about Delia being a child with bad vibes who is unpleasant to be around. They literally use the phrase, very negative life force. He feels sick and tells the nanny to bring Delia to the fair, and then nearly backs right into Karen. Let's take a breath. We've now hit the 30-minute mark. The nanny, whose name is Jo, sees an inverted cross in the fog of her shower mirror. Oh my god! And convinces Karen to let her take Delia to the psychic fair. Cut! We get a weird montage of workers at the psychic fair making faces when they see Delia. Jo forces Delia to get a picture taken by the Jeep guy with a camera that shows auras? ? And they describe her vibe as an infection, a pestilence, like the aura of a Borgia. Anyway, a bunch of booths explode into flames, and the whole thing burns down. Cut! We're at a science museum, and Karen tells her friend that we've never met before about the auras, and her friend makes a joke about Carrie. Cut! Jo's trying to meditate and blames Delia to her face for all the shit that happened. And Delia, very reasonably, is like, I'm 8, that kid peed his pants on his own, his dad died on his own, I didn't set any fires. Jo asks about the inverted cross, and she says, my father taught me that, and then spits in Jo's face. Jo runs to her room, where the Rottweiler busts in and boots her out the window, and she dies. Cut! Karen's getting sedated in a hospital for some reason, and is apparently pregnant, to Delia's frustration. Cut! Karen's like, Delia hates me and is evil, and Gene's like, kids act out sometimes. Cut! We're at a dinner party, and Delia won't say grace. Oh my god. Cut! Karen asks a priest about Bible passages, and he says modern society is demonic. Cut! Jehovah's Witnesses give Delia a fucking watchtower, and she rips it up in front of them. Cut! Sister Yvonne has disappeared. Cut! Karen is too pregnant to get up. Cut! Karen is hiring a PI named Earl, played by the great Michael Lerner, to find Delia's backstory. And there's a very funny moment when Karen tries to recount the plot of the movie, and the PI goes, whoa, whoa, and she apologizes. I know how you feel, guys. Earl pulls up a citizens' action committee that apparently helped get Gene elected. And the camera holds on a list of names, and she reacts like we're supposed to recognize any of them. But how the fuck could I possibly? Cut! Earl is at the orphanage, and there's clowns at the door! Earl uses this to sneak a bunch of files. Cut! Delia drew a picture of the Founding Fathers, and Karen is mad about it. Delia sneaks a peek at Earl's business card. Cut! We get a montage of Earl doing PI business. Cut! Apparently Yvonne became a sex worker and then joined a cult. Cut! Karen wakes to Delia touching her and flips out. Cut! Karen's had the baby. Cut! Earl finds Yvonne at a Pentecostal snake pit event. Earl shows her a pic of her and the baby, and the snakes attack everyone. Cut! Yvonne tells Earl the beast awakens and dies. Cut! They've hired a new nanny. Cut! Earl mails some info, has demonic visions, and gets hit with a wrecking ball. Huh! Cut! Karen won't let Delia touch the baby. Cut! Gene randomly says they should move to Rome, which Karen finds terrifying because that's where the Antichrist comes from. Cut! Karen gets Earl's package, goes to the doctor's office, stabs the doctor in the hand, and demands to know who Damien Thorne, Delia's real father, is. He tells her, and she makes a convoluted leap of logic that her new baby is Delia's twin brother 8 years later, and Gene got his position thanks to Satan worshipping, which is literally the plot of Rosemary's Baby, and never comes up again. Anyway, she stabs him in the heart. Cut! Twist, the new nanny, who we met once for 3 seconds, is also evil and is also dead. Cut! Her new baby has 666 on his hand, but Karen can't shoot him, so she shoots herself. Cut! Hey, remember how the first one ended with a funeral? This one does too. The end. Whew! What a fucking mess. This film was originally credited to 2 separate directors, with a third for action sequences, and is basically a remake of the original if the remake was edited down from a 6-hour miniseries into 97 minutes. So breakneck paced, it'll make you nauseous. As you might have guessed, The Awakening did not make the world crave more Omen films, so the series sat dormant again until about 2005, when I'm assuming somebody woke up and said, hey, you know how The Omen came out on 6676? Well, 6606 is coming up. We should make another Omen. They were so committed to this bit that when the film got made, it became one of the extremely few films in movie history to be released on a Tuesday. So all their advertising could be like, come see it on 666, like the devil. Get it? Incredibly, the script by Dan McDermott was deemed so close to the original script that the WGA decided it would be entirely and exclusively credited to David Seltzer, the writer of the original film script, who had nothing to do with this one and hadn't had a script made in years. And this is, in fact, his final officially produced writing credit. Fun side note, Dan McDermott is now the president of AMC. Anyway, having watched the 2006 remake, they're right. This is exactly the same movie. Robert Thorne's wife lost her baby, Priest gives him a new baby. Now it's Liev Schreiber and Julia Stiles. Also, it's Kate instead of Kathy. Same happy family montage, same short lust a baby behind a tree scene. This time, Robert isn't quite ambassador to Britain, until the guy he works under catches some Final Destination shit. The photographer is David Thewlis now. Love that guy. If you asked me who's the perfect analog for David Warner in 2006, I'd pick Thewlis. Good casting. There's a lot of good casting, actually. The Warning Priest is Pete Postlethwaite, The Exorcist is Michael Goff, and making the Rosemary's Baby connection even more defined, the evil nanny is played by Rosemary herself, Mia Farrow. But anyway, yeah, a lot of this is shot for shot or close to it. A lot of the scenes are only slightly modified. The priest confronts him in the lobby instead of his office. They don't go on a safari, they go to the zoo. The clandestine meeting starts with it already pouring rain, which makes it feel less supernatural. Damien knocks his mom off the banister with a razor scooter instead of a big wheel. The set decoration for the priest's place is a little more 7-y. They meet the priest out in the middle of a big, dramatic open space where it's snowing instead of just where he would naturally be. Also, he looks more like Snoke now. I will say, they do a better job underlining the his mother was a jackal thing than the original, which assumed you remembered somebody said that once an hour before. Also, he doesn't have a fight with the evil nanny at the end, he just sorta runs past her. There's only a couple new sequences. Kate has a couple little spooky dreams, and also there's a weird scene where she catches Damien making a sandwich in the middle of the night that is never followed up on. One rare new addition is that they have the evil nanny actively get into Kate's hospital room through subterfuge and kill her medically, which is more realistic but less fun than just pretending to be a nurse and chucking her out the window. Keith, the photographer's death, is also very Final Destination, which sort of dulls the bluntness of the original. I think the main issue with this 2006 movie, other than just being a one-to-one retread, is just that it doesn't have any personality. The WGA were right that the screenplay is almost identical, but the original movie's plot is pretty cheesy and stupid too, but it leans into the Grand Guignol horror of it, with the dramatic camera swoops and the big blaring choral score. It just feels like it had the guts to commit wholeheartedly in a way that this one just can't let itself do. It doesn't look bad or anything, it just looks like a movie from 2006, and rarely does anything just for the vibes, for effect. It feels very stiff, like something they did out of obligation, not inspiration. Also, Pharaoh feels completely wasted. Just like the film, even when she kills, she never gets a chance to act out in any memorable way. Alas. And that's our journey through the Omen franchise as it stands right now. A series whose legacy is pretty murky. People think of Damien among the famed evil kids, but he's mostly a passive observer and the one anybody remembers. And the real star is that Latin chanting. As a franchise, it's one beloved film with a simple, can't-miss premise and execution, 3 increasingly forgotten off-brand sequels, and an even more forgotten remake. The remake was actually a financial hit, grossing $120 million on a sub-$30 million budget, but was instantly forgotten the moment people walked out of the theater. And attempts to follow had stalled regularly until recently, when they announced that David S. Goyer is producing a prequel to the original film called The First Omen, which feels like a weird sell for a movie whose runtime begins at literally the moment its iconic character is born. It's from a first-time director and supposedly features Bill Nighy, Nell Tiger Free, who says that the film is completely finished and they're just waiting for a release date. If and when that actually happens, I'll be back to let you know. But in the meantime, thank you so much for coming on this inaugural journey, returning to the fascinating world of forgotten sequels, known as Sequelology. Let me know if you like this. Let me know if you prefer this format better than doing them one at a time like I was a couple years ago. And most of all, let me know if you have any ideas or suggestions for other franchises of any length past 1 that you think would be interesting to cover here. Thank you, and be well.